Welcome to this podcast, Holistic Creators, where we share our unique and universal stories about shaping the future for the 4 Ps: people, planet, purpose, and profit. My name is Swanette. I'm a mental coach and your host of this show. My intention for this show is to inspire you on your path to a holistic future. So welcome. Welcome to my podcast, Holistic Creators. My name is Swanette and I'm your host. I would like to introduce Kevin O'Connor. Kevin is the founder of the Spiritus Group, a management consulting firm that works primarily with startup companies that have a focus on sustainability. He is also the founder of Practical Masculinity, which is his life coaching business, where the focus is on supporting men who are going through major transitions in their life. Kevin is a serial entrepreneur who has started over a dozen businesses over the last 20 years. So Kevin, welcome to my podcast. I'm happy to have you on my show today.
Thank you, Swanette. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm in Southern California, in a little town called Carlsbad, and I'm a Canadian from Toronto, Canada.
Okay.
And you are from Germany, living in the middle of the Atlantic. So what an international podcast we're having today.
Yeah, and it's fantastic that we can use this technology to talk on the other side of the continent with you. And,
yes.
So very welcome. So I'm interested, and I'm sure my audience is as well. So these are different things I just told my audience about. You're working in sustainability, but also you're working in creating businesses and have something to do as a coach with masculinity. So these are different things. And I'm curious, how did you come to the place where are you now? What is your story?
Well, although they seem very disparate and disconnected, they're actually very aligned, because if we think about us as sort of our own little world and the impact that we have in the world around us, then the more that we are connected to ourselves, the more that we understand why we're here, what we're called to do, the more that we are more aware of what's going on around us, and perhaps the more that we are connected and tied into the ecosystem of society and the planet. So even though starting businesses and working with organizations that are sustainable, as well as working with men, seem different, there is something to be said. For example, if you look at the value system of a man and you look at how they've been educated over the years and what they think they're called to do, that's shifting. The traditional family doesn't really seem to be the majority anymore. There are very different formats of family. And sometimes men are very confused these days. They have been raised in blended families, single parents. They are in partnerships with people of the same sex, of the opposite sex, or they're single through much of their life. Everything's very, very different. And so there aren't many guidelines or guideposts or signposts for them to understand what their role is. And we have this society that is built around consuming. And that, if you look at sort of how that system works, if we have companies that are designed to generate profit, they need more customers to buy more things from them. And the only way that they'll satisfy their shareholders if they buy more things from more customers, where there's higher margin, lower cost. And so that drives a certain kind of way of being on this planet. And if we don't really know who we are as men, we are susceptible to the messaging that's coming from the rest of the world. So we are encouraged to consume. The world is grabbing at our attention, and you probably heard this a lot. There is this attention addiction, and it happens often in men, where sports, gambling, pornography, substances, things that take us away from where we are in the moment and distract us and provide us with some sort of stimulation. Now, why is that not the most constructive? Because that is a disease of detachment and isolation. And so if we think about sustainability, and we think about an ecosystem, and then we think about the community of the world, and we think about men kind of floating through, drifting through the world right now, not exactly knowing their role, you can see that If a man gets grounded and understands his values and understands why he's here, he starts making a different set of decisions that may actually be in the best interest of the world. Now, that's not to say that my focus is exclusively on men. My actual consulting practices are focused on women. I actually consult with women who are starting businesses and men who are in life transition. So it's not like I have a bias. It's just that I can speak to some of the challenges that middle-aged men have, as I'm a middle-aged man who's gone through that transition.
Yeah, so what I see is, of course, how you behave for yourself and feel inside. This will have the impact in the outside. If you know about your own values and know about being aware of who you really are, then you will behave differently in the environment. And of course, if it is all about consumption, you are not aware that you use resources and that this way of living does have an impact on the environment. So I can see this connection, of course.
Yeah, and I think we can connect everything. And I think that's the beauty. Somebody might be doing something here and somebody might be doing something else. But usually there's 1 or 2 degrees of separation and that they're interconnected. So I think that interconnection, being aware of that and being able to pull people together is sort of a critical thing that's missing right now in society, because we have so much disconnection, we have so much division, we have so many polarized perspectives that we're missing the power of working collaboratively. And that's when the most powerful things get done.
Mm-hmm. So you said you are middle-aged men. So have you been always the way you are now, or has there been also a huge transformation inside of yourself?
So my life looked remarkably different. It couldn't have looked more different. So if you go back to 5 years, I was in a marriage that was 30 years long. I have 2 adult children. I had 2 homes. I lived in Toronto. I was a successful businessman. And my life looked like the majority of upper middle class, middle-aged men. My children had gone to private schools. They both were well educated. One of them became a professional athlete. The other one is a successful entrepreneur. I had a very idyllic kind of standard life. We had a dog. We just, had a few cars. I mean, we could just sort of put a big circle around that. And if you would say it, we probably fit that model. I left my marriage in 2015. I sold a portion of my business, a big portion of my business. I gave almost all of my possessions away. I kept only what I could put in a van. I drove across the country to the west coast of Canada. I sent 8 boxes ahead of me. I brought a set of golf clubs and my road bike and a flat screen TV and my computer and whatever I could fit in the van. And my wife got the properties and I started from zero again. I spent about 1.5 years to 2 years sort of, I guess the cliche would be finding yourself or figuring it out. I was living on my savings, and then I started to do more personal development work and try to understand, well, at 55, what am I here for? I by all measures in society, I had been successful, yet I didn't feel successful. I felt actually quite lost and quite a great deal of despair. And I thought to myself, time to look inward. And in many respects, my life unraveled, like a sweater. You pull on a little piece of yarn and eventually you just have a ball of yarn and you don't have a sweater. And the analogy that I use is that I better learn to knit, because I better knit this yarn, which was me, my essence, into something that I felt good about. And maybe the sweater I was wearing before was one of those ugly sweaters. And maybe I needed to, knit something that felt good, that fit me, that, fit my frame. And so that's what I've been doing these last few years. And as part of that, I've always been a mentor. I've always been somebody who liked to work with my own staff, and I always felt that when I hired somebody, I was always really training them for their next job. So I was a natural mentor. So I started my consulting practice. And then as I did more work, I realized there are a lot of men like me that really didn't know how to express themselves, struggled with intimacy, didn't have a lot of deep, friendly connections, didn't know what vulnerability was, were afraid of vulnerability, and had a lot of competing messages going on in their minds. and we're feeling some shame, some inadequacy, we're struggling. And I thought, well, since I have kind of dug into that and come out the other side, maybe there's some value in me being able to spend time with men who may be coming on the front end of that, maybe save them some time. So I went through sort of, I took the long road, and I sort of say there's probably a more direct route. The analogy that I use is that if you go to a campground and it's late at night and it's dusk and you want to walk to the lake, and I'll use this, in Germany they love to camp. In Canada, there's Germans come over to Canada all the time for the outdoors. And I sort of stumbled through the forest, it took hours to find the lake, and then realized later, like, you can just walk around this path and get to the lake in about 10 minutes. So my real calling, I think, is to help men find the path to the lake, dip their toes in, and start to experience life. And that's my story, and that's how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, well, this is fantastic. So you're able to knit, and you know the fast track.
I do. I know some life hacks that might save them some anguish,
Okay.
Like, for example, you don't actually have to leave your marriage to find yourself.
Yeah.
So many men step out of a marriage because there's something that they haven't been able to find in their marriage, and they look for that affirmation, that connection from somebody else, from a new experience, from just, a midlife crisis, so to speak. And what they really are looking for is inside them. And it doesn't necessarily mean they have to leave a marriage, or it doesn't necessarily mean they have to stay in a marriage that doesn't, where they're not being able to show up in the way that satisfies them and where they can make the biggest difference. So, these kind of insights were kind of lost to me.
So going back a little bit, what was this kind of tipping point or this awakening moment that you figured out, okay, so I really have to change something. I can't go on like I did the last 30 years. So what was the special moment?
So the special moment is a moment that wasn't so special. And it's a moment that most people experience and many people experience in life. I chose to fall in love with somebody that I wasn't married to. And I say it wasn't so special because it was powerful. It was a massive catalyst, but I don't think it would fit the definition of what we would call special because of the pain and the anguish and the upset that it was caused. And so, I was unfaithful after 28 years of being faithful. And that comes with huge consequences. And yet at the time I was blind to those because I was not understanding what was it in me that was so unhappy. So, we project outward, we look, we focus outward, and we get a feeling, we get a catch of a feeling that we haven't felt for a while, and we make a decision. And those who will tell you that they met somebody, their twin flame, or they just met their soulmate and it just happened, they're not, in my opinion, being completely honest. They may have felt incredible chemistry and attraction and connection, and then they made a decision. They made a decision to pursue that, to go deeper. And at some point, something was telling them, you are now betraying the trust of another person. You are now stepping into something that isn't part of your partnership contract. And so I do believe we're all aware when we make those decisions at that moment. We may not know exact moment it happened, but it is a series of hundreds of little decisions that we make that ultimately have us say, well, I found this person and it's not my wife, and where do I go with that? But there were 90 other decisions before that moment. So that was the string, piece of yarn starting to be pulled. So I noticed, obviously, that little piece of yarn, the bottom of the sweater, and instead of knitting it back in or clipping it or wondering why I'm snagging that sweater, I pulled the yarn, and then the yarn sort of became unraveled. And that was the time when I began to look at everything. And I can remember thinking to myself, that if it was this easy, or if this happened so naturally, what was I not paying attention to in my marriage? And it wasn't about my marriage. It was, what wasn't I paying attention to about myself? You know, I didn't take responsibility for where I was in my marriage, and I didn't have the tools to be able to bring that marriage closer together. I was very confused and very ill-equipped, and quite a novice at being able to try to sort through this. So it unraveled, and my marriage ended. A number of things sort of came together to, my business started to suffer because I wasn't present in terms of being tuned in and attentive, and a lot of things began to unravel, as they will when you make a life change and it's not thought through, and it's also you don't think of the consequences of the ripple effect of that. So that was the catalyst.
So what did you find out when you started looking inside that you didn't mention before, but then it came to the surface?
Well, you know, I really believe that we tend to look at our future through the lens that we were given when we were growing up. And so, you know, we have this concept that the ego always wants to be right. So the ego interpreted my life to be a certain way as I was growing up. My relationship with my family, it was a challenging life. There was a lot of abuse in the family, physical and emotional abuse. And there were a whole bunch of limiting beliefs that were sort of printed on me, you know, things that, and so on one level, I was a super achiever because I essentially had to prove everybody wrong. But on another level, my achievement was to compensate for a deep feeling of inadequacy. And when we look at that, and the ego says, well, this is who you are, and you want to look at your future, you just take the same lens and you project it forward, and all that is a different version of your past. So it took me to actually say, I'm going to change out that lens and say, that lens no longer shapes colors, gives me perspective on my future. I'm using another lens, a lens of removing any limited beliefs, a lens of self-love, a lens of understanding my fallacies, and a lens of forgiveness of myself, a lens of all these things that actually release you and give you excitement and have you feel positive about the future, as opposed to fall into the same path and pattern that you've had. And that's a big part of my coaching, is that for the most part, we have a script, we have a dance, we have a way in which we lead our lives. And unless we become aware of that and change the tune and change the step, you know, we're just going to end up where we already are, just a different version of it.
So how did you do that? Like most of the people have this concept that the future will be put on the path they already had. But as you said, if you change your lens, then the future can be different, and people can live a different version of themselves. So how did you change this kind of lens and figure out, okay, I want to change my past or the current moment and then create a different future for myself? So what are the tools you use, or what did you do for that?
I think there are three tools and I think this is particularly relevant to men, but it's relevant to all relationships as well. Number one is living in responsibility. And what I mean by that is that if you take life as a series of events as an equation where you have E, which is the event, and then you have R being our reaction or our response, and then we have equals O for outcome. If we choose not to react, but choose a certain response to that event, we'll get a different outcome. So the victim, the person who lets things happen to them, sees an event and they react, and there's an outcome. The person who says, what responsibility do I have for my life and the outcome, may make a certain different set of choices. So the most concrete analogy I can use is somebody who's diagnosed with terminal cancer. And we all know people who've been given sort of a death sentence. You see those who are lamenting, and everybody goes through that grieving process, but there are those who are bitter, are angry, are discouraged, and that becomes a downward slide right to the time that they leave this planet. And there are those who say, well, I knew I was going to die. Now I have, because I was born, so I know I'm going to die. And now I have a pretty good idea when. What does my next 6 months look like? Who am I? What contribution do I make? What kind of relationships do I want to have with my family? Who do I need to say sorry to? Who do I want to reconnect with that I miss? And they spend their time still with the illness, but they spend their time creating a new future for themselves. Now, both of those outcomes are the same. They die. But one took responsibility for how that was going to look, and the other one, was complaining and a victim to the illness. Like, look what's happened to my life, how unfair. So living in responsibility says that you don't blame, you don't point fingers, you don't place fault. You just say, in this situation, in this experience, how I live my life, what part do I have control over? And when I make a new choice, I'm going to get a different outcome. So that's a big piece. So if you think about how couples are, often couples in conflict are debating, they're fighting. Somebody needs to prove somebody right. It's the same, if you look about this as an ecosystem, it's the same in the environment. You make one decision at the expense of another decision. So what happens if you go win-win, which says being right is actually what's best for the relationship. And if we're either moving towards harmony in our relationship or we're moving away from harmony. And so I may be insistent that what I did was this and what you did was wrong, but at what expense am I making that choice? Am I making that choice at the expense of the quality of our relationship, about the intimacy, about the environment that we're living in because there's conflict? And you find if you actually say, keep that relationship sacred, you'll make a whole different other set of choices. It doesn't necessarily mean you believe that the other person couldn't have made a different decision. That's for them living in responsibility, but it does mean that you decided to respond a different way and you'll get a different outcome. So that's the number one, first, living in responsibility. The second one is complete honesty. And this is something we see less and less in society. We see truth being shaped around specific outcomes, half-truths. And we don't even know what truth is. So I talk about what your truth is. What's my truth? So my truth would be, what is it that that I'm wanting to say and what I'm feeling, and to, obviously you need to manage how that's delivered, but you want it to be as pure, as clear, and as unencumbered as possible. So you give the other person the benefit of making a decision about the information you give them. And we live our lives with half-truths. I mean, I think from probably the biggest, one of the number one things people are living in dishonesty or not living their truth is intimacy, making love. How many times does a partner say to the other person, "No, that felt good," or "I had an orgasm," or "That was wonderful"? They're already filtering their words. Or, "How do I look in this outfit?" "Oh, you look great." The things that we do in the course of a day because we don't want to risk giving people clear information because we're afraid of the feedback and the response. But in reality, all that does is prevent them from being able to have access to the truthful information, or your truth, so that they can make an adjustment. So truth, responsibility, and the third one is vulnerability, especially with men. Vulnerability means taking risk. We think in society that if you are vulnerable, some men think if you're invulnerable, that's a sign of weakness. And I like to flip that around. And I said, if you're not vulnerable, that's a sign of weakness, because vulnerability requires courage. And it's courageous to be able to put something out there and take a risk. It's not courageous to hold it back. That's actually not courage. That's actually what I would call not, if someone was to say, I wouldn't say that's actually manly behavior. Men actually talk about feelings and they take the chance that somebody else is going to be confused or react to that. But they have enough self-confidence and enough self-worth to realize that it's not a reflection of who they are. They're being really honest with their feelings. So those are the three: responsibility, honesty, and vulnerability. And it's not just a male thing, and if we look at business and business practices within that context, we will see different things happening in the planet, because how many people are reluctant to be honest about the work that they've chosen to do and the impact it has on the environment, impact, or the or decisions they make around the foods they eat. We're masters of being in denial and blocking information from getting in that might make us uncomfortable.
Yeah, wow, yeah, absolutely. Seeing responsibility for themselves and also for the decisions they make in the outside. But this also means that people are aware of what they are choosing. Like often we have, like, because of our education, because of our culture, that we have this is the experience I have, and these are the feelings that are coming up, and because of this I react in a certain way. And so stepping out of that means you have to stop it somewhere and opening up options of other possible choices. So how does this, before you can come into responsibility, you have to be aware of that, and you have to have a kind of stopper so that you don't go into the normal decision. So what is this kind of stopper, for example, for you?
Well, I think the lessons that life teaches as you get older around death and around success and around values, we can just ignore those opportunity for lessons, or we can use that shakeup, that disturbance, that awakening for something that'll help us develop our own kind of awareness. And what I mean by that is that, the older you get, the more you realize that we're mortal, that there's an end coming. And I'm in the last third of my life, there's an end coming. It's an uncomfortable thing to think about it. And at moments when I think about it, it's terrifying. That your life will end because you only know this existence. But if you start to realize that there's so much more that you don't know, and that and you embrace the idea that, like, you just don't know anything. And I actually am at the point where I actually say I don't know anything at all. I just don't know anything. And as soon as you can acknowledge that there's a good chance you just don't know everything. In fact, there's a good chance you don't know most things. Then you're open to possibility that another person's perspective can be informing, can educate you. But if you are rigid and locked into a certain belief system and a certain way of living your life, and you won't allow yourself personally to challenge whether that is the best for you or whether there's other choices you can make, then the likelihood you're going to have positive influences from other external sources is really, it's really low. So I think, to your point, the first thing you have to realize is that, the moment I realize like I don't know anything is the moment that I'm actually open to hearing everybody, whether it's somebody who's telling me that there's an underground government that's one world order that wants to bring this, and I say, now I can react to that and go like, come on, or I can say, tell me about that. What is that all about? And start applying my own critical thinking and come up with my own opinion. Or somebody recently said to me the other day, well, that the virus was created in an election year to get Donald Trump out of office. Now, they were adamant, and I could have said, that's a bit of a stretch for me. I don't think I can, and I argue with them, or I could say, tell me more. What is that all about? Ultimately, I'll form my own opinion. But I think this comes back to, I didn't react. I'm not like, what, are you kidding me? Like, that's a joke. Because of course that'll create a chain reaction. So if we accept that we don't really know everything and are staying open to other possibilities and other perspectives, what happens is you ultimately start to see people as human beings as opposed to the positions they take. And you can break bread and you spend time with them and you realize that core components of that person, they're a good person. They just have a different interpretation of life than you do. And you can still get along. Unfortunately, people are so polarized now they aren't letting in the possibility that another perspective has any value.
I totally like that. What I see is there is no objectivity. So everything you experience is because of your subjective education, culture, your belief system, everything around that. So being in the same room, we would definitely experience the world differently. And allowing your perspective to influence me or to think about why are you seeing this and I'm not aware of that. I have always a wonderful exercise. I'm telling the people, you have 1 minute and look around everything that is blue in this room. And I'm choosing blue because I see a lot of blue things behind you. And then I tell them, okay, now close the eyes and tell me everything that is red in the room. And people don't know because they have their own focus. And even though there might be a lot of things that are also red in your room, they don't get it. And so that's something that, the reality is never objective. So letting other people's opinion also matter and having this as a base for a conversation or a discussion and understanding, okay, perhaps there's something in that is also relevant for me or can be true for me, then my own truth will change.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking, the beauty of podcasts and a podcast like yours is that, when you listen to the other person and also listen to yourself, your positions and your ideas are still formulating, they're still evolving, One of the frustrations I have in my life right now is that the men that I know in their late 50s that I've spent time with growing up, they seem to stop evolving, close to retirement. It's like, okay, I don't have to learn it anymore. I mean, I'm just like, I'm done. And I'm actually, Gail, slightly anxious thinking I'm going to run out of time before I can learn as much as I want to learn. I'm fascinated and curious about so many things. I kind of feel like I'm in kindergarten. I'm the first year, I'm preschool. I'm like going into this, like what? And so many of the people and I think this has to do with aging, is that they have chosen now that they finished, that work's done. And it's like, I'm not the same person this year as I was last year. I wasn't the person last year that I was the year before. So surely we're not, when you're retiring from your job and you've been working with the government for 35 years, surely there's room for growth and learning and investigating things. And so I think it's a philosophy, it's a value system. I just am amazed by different things. And I have a 31-year-old daughter who's a women's life coach, and she teaches me stuff every single day. My 28-year-old son and the people around me. I'm around a lot of young people, and I'm like, well, wow, what's that all about? How does that work? It was Facebook, then it was Instagram, then it was TikTok, then it was Snapchat, now it's Clubhouse. It's all of these. It's like, I can just say, I'm done, or I can say, let me understand technology, and then also let me understand the downside to it. So adding on to what I said earlier, it's probably curiosity is the next big thing. Be curious.
Yeah, what I also see is that some people just get older and others kind of mature. So they're becoming more wise, more getting to know more things and changing their perspectives and are curious about learning and getting this kind of wisdom when they get older. And so this is more what I hear from you, that you really feel, okay, I want to understand more about mankind, about the environment and how this is influencing each other, and what can I do to help especially men to understand that at some certain point it is also important to do the next step for them in their personal growth. And one thing you said also was like, how can men come in contact with their emotions, showing up vulnerable? Can you go a little bit deeper into that? Because I see a lot of men that are not connected to themselves, to their emotions, and show up as these kind of strong men, though they are not really inside. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, you come from a culture where that would be particularly relevant. I mean, maybe this is a cliche coming from a Canadian, but you know, the cliches that I would have heard about German men is that they're very precise. They're very, you know, it's a society that's built around accuracy and engineering precision and around great processes and well organized and you know, it values the masculine in terms of advancing, putting things you know, in a linear way together to create an output. I mean, that's part of being in the masculine anyway. But I want to circle back to that. But you know, this is the power of these conversations, is that I was thinking, you know, when we talk about the masculine, we do talk about being analytical and critical and advancing things. It's the doers, it's the getting done. But isn't it interesting that people can be in their masculine, but at the same time apply a certain amount of resistance and rigidity to new concept and new idea? So, you know, if somebody is a critical thinker and they are problem solving and they are an engineer, or isn't it interesting that they can do that and then yet block the possibility that there are other equally sophisticated and remarkable things that may not be aligned with their discipline, but they're occurring over here. It's almost like selective masculinity. It's like, I will apply myself in this laneway, but if somebody comes in here and talks about energy, or somebody comes in here and talks about a different perspective, I will shut that down. And it seems to be counterintuitive. That's like the scientist in the lab is creating a vaccine and someone says, have you thought about this? And they say, nope, I'm just doing this. Well, what about all these incredible things we could discover if we just thought out of the box? So it's funny that it's kind of ironic that men can get fixated on moving forward and getting things done. And yet vulnerability is a way of getting something. I mean, if you are vulnerable and honest and take responsibility in the relationship, you create harmony and resiliency and intimacy. You won't be able to have an intimate, deep, connected relationship with your partner if you aren't honest, if you aren't accepting responsibility and being open to feedback and taking that feedback and processing and making changes, if you won't tell them how you feel, because they won't know you. And, you know, intimacy is about knowing the other person, all sides of the other person. They will just know the person that you reveal to them. Well, after the first few years of marriage, you've revealed all of that packaged part. They want to know more. So it's ironic that the problem solver, the masculine, doesn't want to focus on solving that challenge. And that's the funny thing, is that I say to men, tell me all the things in your marriage that you have accomplished, that you do better now than when you were 30 years of age. And they can give you a list. Well, I managed my money better. I restored an antique boat. I learned how to sail. You should see me golf. And then I say, so you put all of this energy into these activities and you got a certain outcome. Yeah, I'm good at sailing. I can hit that ball 300 yards. And say, well, what kind of energy did you put into your marriage, your relationship, your lovemaking? And they look at me like I'm crazy. It's like, well, is it any doubt that you're struggling in your relationship after 20 years? If you knew how to apply yourself, but you won't apply yourself in this area. It's like, I'll do these 4 things because I get it. But this scary part, this relationship part where I have to talk to somebody, connect, I won't apply. In fact, I'll apply less effort in my marriage than I did in my courtship. Because I've achieved it. That, you know, for men, it's like, I got her. We're married. And whether it's same sex or opposite sex, is like the relationship. When you're in your masculine, it's like I've got the relationship. I've accomplished it. And for your partner, the feminine is like, I've started the relationship. I get to grow it. We get to blossom. The man's like, I'm done. But we're together. Let's get the kids going. And they're like, no, we're starting. Two different places. So coming back to your point, it's helping men understand that this time, this energy invested in connecting has a even bigger payoff. How many hours do you have to go to the golf course to learn how to swing and kick and hit a ball? You can create intimacy in your relationship in 5 minutes in a day. You can wake up and tell your partner, I'm so blessed to wake up beside you. You're amazing. I just want to tell you how much I love you. You go to work, 10 o'clock in the morning, you can pull out your phone and say, thinking about you. Really, I'm in a boring Zoom call right now and I'm falling asleep, but I want to tell you, you're pretty special. I can't wait to see you tonight. Later in the evening, like you might do another one in the afternoon. I can tell you when you're off work and you're connecting, the smile on your partner's face, it's like, wow, we did this. Wow, we've got this connection. That might have taken 3 minutes of your day. And now you're going to get 3 hours. Can you tell me something else that has a factor of 10 like that you do? No. 3 hits of the ball and you can play golf remarkably well for 3 hours now. So it's a matter of shifting men's mindsets that there is a payoff, there is an outcome, there is something to be achieved by digging into yourself and into your relationship. And when they get that, they go, oh, now I know why, because they need to know why they're doing something men do. They don't just want to enjoy the process. It's like, there's something at the end of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So in the first part of my life, I have been an engineer. So I'm, as a female, also like this, okay, this is my strategy and I find solutions. But I also use this in personal development. So I see, of course, this can be in this side and this side. And I'm curious, what kind of men are coming to you that will be open to step into this process?
My most recent client is a 60-year-old, very successful physician. There's nothing stopping that person from, they were a rock climber, a wind seal, like they could do anything, and then they were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So the practice of medicine, their ability to master all of the elements and all of the activities, that just evaporate overnight. It's like the tremor began. They began to start thinking through this progressive disease and the implications in their life. And they realized that they had a very rigid framework about what their life was and who they were. And they defined themselves based on their practice of medicine and their remarkable achievements in the outdoor world. And their success in they had command over their environment. The command that they're going to have over their environment is not going to be external anymore. It's going to be their ability to have a command over the way in which they interface with the world, based on a whole different set of criteria. That's a massive shift for that person. And those kind of things lead to people, when they have those kind of diagnoses, or that becomes very discouraging, to the point where many people will say, my life's over, So that would be an example. Now, that's an extreme situation. I will tell you that most often men reach out to me at the request of their partner. And, very rarely do they just get online, go to my Instagram, or and have someone say, this guy's pretty cool. And then they go, yeah, I'm going to call him. What usually happens is someone says it's really close to them, I see that you're struggling and you might want to consider this. Now, that wouldn't be like unique to me. Men are the worst at self-care. It's just, we don't do it. We just don't do it. Self-care is just not of any value. People can get into daily practices and they do it for a different reason. But self-care, how many men really follow up and make their annual checkups? Just as I said that, I realized I haven't had one in a few years. How many men? It's usually their significant other and somebody that's taking care of them. So it's usually as a result of a referral, which is fine. I will help anybody. I was them. I tell people that I was the most average, I was the most exceptional everyman. I had the every husband, the everyman, the average man. I had that. I was exceptionally good at being average. And at some point in your life, you realize, is it that hard to be exceptional? Anything I do beyond being average is going to be an improvement. The bar was pretty low. You know, we're not talking about the Dalai Lama thinking like, what's my next level here? We're talking about the average guy going, maybe there's a few things I could do that would actually make a difference in my life. So I kind of, it's kind of a nice place to be because us average guys, we respond pretty quickly.
So what I hear is that this average guy is, for example, focusing a severe health issue that comes to you, or that someone is kind of mirroring them and telling them, so it would be good if you change something because I can see something that you can't see by yourself. So now do the step and go to Kevin. And
absolutely. And the relationships, you know, I do this. I'm just launching a program in about a month for women focusing on online dating. And because I know so much about men and men's behavior, and I've been single and know my way around online dating. But I ask women when they meet a man online, there's two questions that can just set them up for success. Or if they ask them, can you tell me what part of, you told me about your relationship or the ending of your marriage, what part of that would you accept some responsibility for? This comes back to the responsibility conversation. But what was it that, like, if you had it done differently, there might have been a different outcome? So first of all, they have, I say, don't talk to them anymore if they can't answer that. If their answer is like, well, she cheated, or we drifted apart, or, you know, this is what happened. It's like there's an excuse that they didn't see their role in that in any capacity. Because there's always going to be a role, like even if it's 1% to 99, somebody goes, I could have been a little less tolerant. I mean, a little more tolerant. I could have worked fewer hours. You know, I put my job as my priority, or whatever that is, there's something. And then I ask them that when, like, I'm assuming that someone can come up with something, I say, then they tell you, I say, ask them, what is it they've done in their life since then to ensure that that doesn't come up in their next relationship? And they can't answer that. Chances are whatever it was that they identified is going to come back again. So if they said, I'm a workaholic, I focused too much, you know, I was trying to establish myself, or it's like I was just, you know, I'm always doing this, or, you know, whatever their responsibility was. If they haven't done anything to sort of say like, I think that's probably not, I don't want that to happen, they might not be ready. And then the third question is, tell me how many good dates do you have? Do you regularly have a good date? Most of them will say yes. And then ask them, how many times do you go out on a second date? They say rarely. Then you know they're not ready to date. You know what they did was they came to the date. They came to, I just had Siri answer me there when I said something there. Isn't it weird? Or Alexa, you say a word and they go, tell me, it's just,
I'm sorry.
It's just tell me I'm sorry. So in that situation, that man, again, is using the dating experience as an affirmation process to say, hey, you're a good guy. I want to spend some time with you, but I wasn't actually interested in a relationship. So these are just, people get referred to me after they've gone out on a date with somebody. Sometimes it's like, you seem like a sweet guy, but you're carrying something around. I mean, you spent 2 hours talking about your ex-partner in our date. I mean, that's not really how to do a date. And maybe you should be talking to somebody about it. But there's a difference between coaching and there's a difference between counseling. And I'm not a therapist, so I'm not dealing with issues of mental health. What I'm doing is giving practical, I'm being a set of ears and eyes and setting, using my own perspective and my own experience and helping them identify where they're going, where they want to go and where they are, and helping them come up with concrete strategies and holding them accountable to implement those strategies. So it's no different than a coach for a hockey team or figure skating, it's like, this is our objectives. This is where you're at. What do we need to put in place in order to get there? Not as to deep understanding or pulling through, what happened as a child, or let's talk about that. It's not psychotherapy. It's really practical recommendations, which works for most men because they're already afraid to be open. So it's like, oh, I'm going to just talk about stuff. We get open, but it's not for the purposes of being open. It's for the purposes of moving them forward in their lives.
Yeah, wow, this is so inspiring. And I will try for the next dating these questions, and let's figure out how fast this conversation will end.
Yes, it's remarkable. And I know there's another one, which is when I talk to men, which just always blows my mind now, but I was the guy before. Remember, good coach really just coaches into himself. Everybody they're the student to the person. It's a very equal reciprocal arrangement. They learn massive amounts about life by even interacting with your client. But the other one is, and maybe this is for another day, which is, tell me exactly, you've been married 20 years, tell me exactly the fantasies of your partner, the things that really light them up, the things that they're thinking about in those very moments in their cycle when they're very hormonal and they're just feeling so invigorated. And sadly, most men can't tell you. So if you want to know about intimacy and you want to be better connecting, wouldn't you want to take the time to understand what is it that how is your partner wired? What would have led you to be excited when you were 28 years of age and jumping into bed every 15 minutes because when you're 45, when you're 50, that visual stimulation, that chemistry with your partner is often gone, but you still have a rich, sensual life. And so the question is, like, the more I know about my partner, the more that I'm able to invite some of those images, those stories, set up situations. They say, well, I often think about making love, in the forest, to be honest. And it's like, where are we driving on Sunday? We're going to the forest. What? I think we'll go for a little hike. And, we're going for, a little special hike planned. So it's like, we're going off the beaten track so it's just that investigation. And I guess it comes back to, what effort are you willing to put into something that's as important as a relationship in order to make it work, considering all the effort you put into everything else in your life. And some people may say, I don't want to put the effort in. And I do get to that point where someone says, like, I'm done. Like, all you're describing makes sense, but I just don't have the stomach I just don't want to do it. Often that comes from the woman more often than not. She'll say, I can't bring myself to go through some of these kind of playful experiences to get closer because I've been thinking about the relationships is kind of over. I think women think about leaving a relationship for 7 to 9 years before they leave, and men think about less than a year. So if a woman is in the tail end, she's not coming back. She's said all she could over the last 7 years. So we've gone over so many things today.
Yeah.
I'm very ADD.
Well, but this was so inspiring and interesting, and I'm always curious. So yeah, thank you for telling me and the audience all that. If my audience is now also curious to come in contact with you, do you have any website, social media, something that you can tell us to come in contact with you?
So here's what, this is a little lesson about social media. And fortunately, it didn't affect me, but it has affected my clients before. When people host, have a lot of information on Instagram, you have to realize that at the courtesy of a third party, that third party is providing them a hosting service so they can put up all their inspirational comments and thoughts and things like that. At any point in time, something can disrupt that platform. And in my case, I had my Practical Masculinity Instagram up. I started it about 8 months ago. It was growing nicely. And then it was hacked. Something got in it. Somebody And then one day on my birthday, I woke up and it was gone. So it was zero. So I'm actually starting my new Instagram. It's just my name. I am Kevin O'Connor. But the best way to do is just to come and send me a note on my website, which is practicalmasculinity.net. And Practical Masculinity, and just there's a little form in there, and you can write me a note. And you can, and I love talking to people, and I'll talk to them about lots of different things. And I'm really committed to taking what I've learned in my life and helping people get to where they want to go a little quicker than I can.
I will type the link down in the description so that people can easily reach out to you and can come in contact with you.
Fantastic.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you would like to share?
What would you like more out of men in society? It's a question for you. How would you like men to show up more in society? I'm asking you that question.
Oh, you are asking me that question.
Yes,
oh, I thought it was the last inspiration.
No, because you're an inspiring woman who's providing your listeners to all sorts of different inputs and opportunities to learn. I would love to learn something from you today. I would love to learn what you think is missing often in the men you come into contact with, in the men that you have relationships with. If they could do a few things and focus on a few things that you thought that would make a big difference, what would those be?
Yeah, so I really miss in a lot of men their connection to their emotions and the way to express them. They can tell me they're feeling bad or they're feeling good, but it is really difficult to tell me if they're feeling bad. What is it? Is it that you are angry or afraid or feel shame? And tell me, where do you feel that in your body so that I can understand how the situation can change that you feel better, for example. What I also miss is this feeling of cooperation and co-creation. I see a lot of this is about competition, that this is my part of the pie, but we women, or perhaps it is only me and the people I'm surrounded by, we have this idea that we can co-create something that is even bigger when we do it alone or when we are in competition. So having this new energy of creating the future for humanity, for the environment, by co-creation, this is something I'm missing in men as well.
That's fantastic. And if I surveyed 100 women, where do you think the first one you mentioned would come in? I think that would be a common one about vulnerability, expression of feelings, knowing where people stand. Do you think that's a pretty common one for women?
I think it is like to be open-minded and showing up with curiosity, like what is the piece of that I don't see? What is it that I can share that other people perhaps need? Something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's really helpful to me because, of course, I am the translator and that's really what I do. I sit between the feminine and the masculine and try to translate for people. So based on my own life experience. So every time somebody has a little message or a little thought about what might be missing on the other side of the continuum, I get to find a way to bring that to that person so that can be heard. So thank you for giving back to me today.
Yeah. So this was a wonderful conversation, and I got so inspired also by everything you spoke about. And yes, thank you for being my guest on the show today.
It was my pleasure, and talking to you in the middle of the ocean from the West Coast of the United States. So wishing you an absolutely amazing rest of the day.
For you as well. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening or watching my podcast, Holistic Creators. If you want to know more about how I can help and support you, have a look at my website, spiritualchangemaker.com. You can also join my Facebook group, Spiritual Changemakers Community. Stay tuned for the next episode by subscribing to this channel. And you also can check the previous episodes.